really exciting session, and I just wanted to give you kind of an overview of what we're going to do. The topic is leading through change. And when I was reflecting on leading through change, and Stephen, you actually gave me a great kind of tee up here on why we need to lead through change, as if you all needed it, I couldn't think of a better person than Tiffanie Boyd. And Tiffanie, I'll do a more fulsome introduction in a second, is the Global Chief People Officer of McDonald. So we're going to have a really rich discussion with her. And of course, we'll open it up to all of your questions. But first, because we are McKinsey, Dickie, who leads all of our change efforts and thought leadership in North America, is just going to ground us in a little bit of a fact base for change and the fact that change is changing and what this looks like. So I'm going to invite Dickie up. He's going to speak to us for a few minutes, and then I'll introduce Tiffanie and we'll start our conversation.
Well, thank you, Brooke, and thank you, all of you. I'm going to give the 3-minute potted version of a ton of research. And it's a really simple, but I hope you'll find provocative story. We have some slides. I'll keep them to the minimum. The first, and this will be no surprise, no one will need convincing after the events of Thursday, but even way before Thursday, and you can pull the slide up if that's okay, there was a vast increase in the volume of change that corporations were dealing with. So tracking from 2016, if you asked executives then, how many mission-critical initiatives do you have, they might name a couple of things. And now it's double digits. So a 5x increase in mission-critical. We have to do this or we won't survive, even before the events of the last week and the last few months. At the same time, there's a crisis in the capacity of change through learned helplessness. So there's a halving of the employee willingness to participate in a change initiative. So put those two stats together, and even I can work out that's a 10x increase in change relative to basically keep the organization afloat and moving forwards. So the volume of change is just unprecedented. And I think we've all been feeling that ourselves in the last few days. The consequences, of course, are huge for humans, with over 50% of employees in a typical US corporation having some early stage through to severe sense of exhaustion or burnout. So the next page then is the variety of change. And this is where I hope we can provoke you to think about taking different action on change. Simple proposition. If you were switching out from a generic, not helpful file sharing software to the wonderful Microsoft SharePoint, there you go, folks, that might be an execution challenge. You've got to tell employees and you've got to help employees. There are many more of those things going on at any point in time in a typical corporation, and they're ungated. So we've got a lot more execution challenges. But that's just the easy part of change. What if it's a cross-functional process involving many teams globally? Well, that might require some mobilization around hearts and minds. And then tariffs, I think we would put in only level 3, which is where you're going to have hundreds of initiatives looking at the economics of this, looking at choices. You're going to have a control tower for that. That's transformation. All of those things can be managed from the top. And to the gentleman who asked the great question from was it Fisher Scientific? There you go, Thermo Fisher Scientific. And the answer is an adaptive change. What's new and different is the scale of reinvention change. This is where the human being needs to be involved in the fundamental redesign of their identity around a role. And that's a really, really difficult thing to do. So people aren't getting benefit from GenAI use cases because they're not actually redesigning the whole role and engaging people. So medical innovation, still evidence-based, takes 15 years. Are we going to wait 15 years to reinvent the role of a doctor, to love working with AI and feel great about it? So categorize your change into 4 categories. And then the final piece, this really is the 3-minute intro. It's ever harder for executives to keep the human at the heart of the change process. So you go to the next slide. How systematically, how do you scale empathy in your organization? And so for a long time, we've talked about what we call the influence model, where the human being is at the center, and you think about 4 different types of change intervention. But it's increasingly hard for executives, less and less connected to the daily experience of their colleagues. particularly around reinvention. So what we're asking for is appreciate as executives the sheer overwhelm of change and how it leads to learned helplessness, categorize change into different types, and recognize if you tackle reinvention change with old execution top-down methods, you're going to make the situation much worse. So what happens when change starts failing? Executives talk about resistance and failure and get on the bus. Well, that's not going to help people reinvent. And so that requires a clarion call for putting empathy at the heart of everything you do. Sometimes talk about the 2 videos of change, or the 2 movies of change. The executive movie is put a gang of people together, make decisions, go rob the bank. That's Ocean's 11. Meanwhile, your organization is in the middle of a love story with history. Love Actually, or choose your love story, and that's the fundamental clash. Okay, thank you. Thank you. Appreciate it. With that, 3 minutes. This is the real act. I'm at, here come you two. Come on up. I'm just the warm-up act. Here's Brooke. Here's Tiffanie.
All right. Thank you, Dickie, for setting the stage there. Let me welcome up Tiffanie now. Let me tell you a couple things about Tiffanie as she makes her way up. So first of all, she is the Global Chief People Officer at McDonald's, and talk about leading scale. McDonald's, in terms of the employees it has and the franchisees, we're talking about nearly 2 million employees globally when you add that up. That's scale in my book. Previous to being the Global Chief People Officer at McDonald's, she led the US, the people function for the US, and prior to that, for 23 years, she was at General Mills, where she started as an intern, which I think is an amazing story. And if you go back even further, this woman bleeds maize and blue.
I do.
She is a Michigan woman through and through. She met her husband there. Her 2 sons,
my sons
go
go
there
there.
now. Yeah. My husband is a Wolverine too, so
great.
I had to mention it.
Okay.
Go blue,
Go blue.
yes. And the other thing that I wanted to mention about Tiffanie before we get into the conversation is picking up on what Dickie said. Tiffany's style to leading is through love and compassion, and we'll talk about that as we get into that. And don't get me wrong, this is also a person who can connect everything to business performance, but there's a specialness about the approach that I think you all will enjoy as we get into the questions. So with that,
Great.
we can sit on down. So Tiffanie,
Yes.
we're going to get into some of the things that you've done at McDonald's, but tell us a little bit about why McDonald's in the first place.
Well, it's interesting. As you mentioned, I had been with General Mills for 23 years, and the great thing about being at a company like that is I had so many great experiences, and I had reached the top, levels of leadership at a fairly young age, and I thought, what am I going to do from here? And so I opened, myself to new opportunities, but I have to admit, when McDonald's called, I was not so sure, because QSR doesn't have, quick service retail doesn't have a reputation for having very strategic HR. And I had been with a company that had been very strategic from the very early days of my career. And so I wasn't sure. But my husband, who is amazing, said, Tiffanie, it's McDonald's. You should talk to them. And so as I got to know the leaders of the company, I started to really fall in love with what they were trying to do. It's a more than $200 billion market cap company. As Brooke said, 2 million employees around the world that work for the brand. And in the US, the president at the time said, Tiffanie, I feel like the brand is under attack for our people practices. He said, I've been out of the country for the last 7 years, and I've come back, and a lot of things were happening. Fight for 15 was big, so people were questioning, are we paying people enough? We had a lot of sexual harassment allegations in the restaurants, so people were wondering, is it safe? We had franchisees and employees suing us for discrimination. So there was questions around, can we trust leadership? This was also shortly after the CEO had been exited and the head of HR had been exited for inappropriate behavior. So a lot was happening at the time. And I actually had a lot of friends say, oh my gosh, I can't believe you're going to McDonald's. And for me, I like to run into the fire, as we often say in the company, and do things that can really make a difference. And I knew what McDonald's meant to so many communities and to all the people who work for the brand, and I believed in what the leaders were saying. in terms of what they wanted to do. So much so that I asked the CEO during my interview, I said, you seem to have big ambitions around what you want for the company. Are you willing to make investments? And he said, Tiffanie, money is not the issue. We just need a strategy and someone who can help lead in this way. So I was all in on that. I felt like I had leaders who were wanting the same things that I would want, although I knew it wouldn't be easy coming into an organization that for almost 70 years had been successful. Our business model is franchise, so 95% of the McDonald's restaurants are owned by franchisees. And there are only two things that they really have independent decision-making on. It's people and pricing. So here I am coming into an organization wanting to change the culture where I don't really have direct sort of control over decision-making. So that was a very interesting situation. And I think we'll probably talk a little bit more about some of the initiatives and things that we did there. But it was, I was a bit of an outsider coming into a company where people had been there for decades and where franchisees and their parents had been in the system, the McDonald's system we call it, for multiple generations. And part of my job was to help them see that they weren't as good as they thought they were. And that's a very hard thing, coming into a company. But they really had a lot of pride in the McDonald's brand and in what they were doing. And I had to say, you're not performing as well as you could, and you're not treating your people as well as you should. And so I think we'll probably talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so let's, and we will talk about some of the things that you've driven and some of those hold up the mirror moments, if you will. But first, you recently took on the global role. And before that, you were, of course, leading in the US. When you stepped into that global role, and just reflecting on that transition, what was hard? What was surprising?
It's different. When I was leading HR for the US business, my job was so connected to how the business was performing. And in this job, I have a more governing kind of role across many segments, so our US business as well as our international segment. And then we have another segment of our business that we call international development licensees, which are partners in key markets around the world. And I'm now trying to figure out, how do I change the company to operate more effectively, to have the talent and processes that we need for 5-10 years down the road versus running a play that can actually help us deliver business results in years. So it's a big difference in terms of scope. It's much more global, as well as thinking much more long-term about how we run the company more effectively.
Okay. Now, as CPO in the role, how has McDonald's thought about culture and change? We've kind of set the groundwork here for the fact that change is changing and change is accelerating. How have you thought about that, and what kind of approach have you put forward at McDonald's?
Yeah, as one of the things that we're working on now is trying to get our teams to understand how to perform and transform. So the performance is all about how do they deliver the results that are required right now. But we have a pretty big ambition around making work easier for the company in the long term. And one of my realizations in coming to McDonald's is that we had not invested a lot in how people actually get their jobs done. So our systems were very outdated. We have 200 plus finance systems and HR systems all around the world. Because we have a franchise model, we've allowed markets around the world to do things independent of what the company approves, or we didn't have sort of global standards on systems, processes, and tools. So you can imagine in a organization like ours, where we operate in more than 100 markets around the world, we have all kinds of mismatch of different things. And then we're not taking advantage of the scale of McDonald's. So we're really trying to move toward a bit more consistency, a bit more global operating model. And that's a big shift for our company, for both our franchisees and for our employees. And there have been a couple of things that we've done. One, we launched a program that we call Accelerate, which was designed at helping leaders understand how we need to operate in this new model. And it was really beneficial for them, because as we looked at the feedback from those sessions, it really helped them get in a different mindset around the benefits of operating globally and why we didn't just want them doing their own thing. It helped them understand that employees are employees of the enterprise, not just employees of a market or a smaller part of our business. So that has been an important launching pad for us. And we've just launched Accelerate 2.0, which is helping people understand their leadership style in this new environment and really think about how they can be more effective. So that development program has been really beneficial for us. We've also done things like incorporated goals, these big transformations into people's goals. Everyone has a people goal, everyone has a transformation goal, so that we're holding them accountable for the changes that we're expecting. We launched what we call cultural norms, which was a way to help people understand how they should operate differently. And it's some basic things like share and steal, which we say you need to get ideas from other markets, from other parts of the company, other functions. And we try to help people with tools and resources to do that. You know, we talk a lot about start with the problem that we're trying to solve. And even some of these small catchphrases, they might seem really light and minor, but when you're trying to impact change, you have to have something that people can grab onto, that they can articulate, that when they hear it, they know what that means. So we've defined that. We also monitor our progress against that in our surveys that we do for all employees. So we've tried to make sure that people are not, that it's not just a poster on the wall, but that it's something that we're implementing and ingraining throughout the organization.
So there's a lot to unpack there, but one initiative that you didn't mention that I'd love you to talk about, because I know you care about it deeply, is the culture of care. And I think there was also a moment, too, on an earnings call where this was mentioned. So tell that story.
Well, maybe I should just start with culture of care. Because when I was in the U.S. job, one of the things I realized, we were coming out of the pandemic, and we were really looking for ways to continue to grow the business. And one of the opportunities that I saw, both as a customer of McDonald's and as an employee, is that we talked a lot about people, but my impression was that we did not really invest in our people. And we could talk about people because we employ lots of them, but the focus was not necessarily on helping them be successful in their roles with consistency. So again, in our franchise model, you have some franchisees that are amazing and they do wonderful things for their people, and then you have some that don't. And nobody was really talking about that. And as we talked about how we were going to increase customer service, I can remember saying in a meeting, I think we need to build a culture of care. And people did like nobody really said anything. I got a little bit of a head nod, like, I'm not so sure. Sounds kind of soft and warm and fuzzy. And I stayed on this topic because it wasn't warm and fuzzy for me. And I started to talk about what culture of care meant. And culture of care means we care about people, which means we're going to pay them well, we're going to offer them great benefits. It means that we care about the work environment. So we're going to create an environment where they're safe and protected and people don't come and feel any level of harassment or abuse, because like, who wants to have that happen to anybody that they care about and on our watch? And 3, we said we want to care about their development. And one of the things that I think McDonald's is great as is creating opportunity. And if we really care about everybody in our company, we would provide them with the skills and resources to continue to grow. So we started to talk about that. We started to measure that. And people started to talk about culture of care. I would be on a market visit and people would say, oh, culture of care. I would say, thank you for something, culture of care. Like, it became like a tagline for everything, but it wasn't just something that people talked about. It actually drove performance. What Brooke is referencing is, I can remember getting dressed one morning, and I was listening to the earnings call because they generally happen early in the morning, and our CEO said, we're trying to build a culture of care. And I was like, oh my gosh, we're talking about culture of care. So it became this really big movement for the US business, and it has delivered meaningful results. You know, one of the things we did is, I told the team, we're only gonna do things that we can measure. So we're not just going to do the things that we think are pretty cool. Like, we have to be able to measure, and we have to be able to tie it to the business. And we knew that decreases in turnover had real impact on sales growth, guest count growth, as well as customer satisfaction. And when I started in the job, we were at 162% annual turnover in the restaurants. And I know I see some of you, like your eyes are like, oh my gosh. And surprisingly, I think it had historically been even higher at times. And so we went on this journey, and 3 years later, we were down to 130. And I just got an update just the other day, and they're at 128. So it's continuing to move in the right direction. And that is real money for our franchisees because they're not retraining people. People who are on the jobs longer obviously have higher levels of competency. I said we can get to below 100, which I think in our industry is almost unheard of. And I said we have to also prove through our company-owned restaurants that all of our investments in people matter. So historically, our company-owned restaurants actually did not perform as well as our franchise restaurants, which makes no sense to me. It made a lot of sense to people who had been in the system for a long time, but I'm like, we run restaurants. Like, we have company-owned restaurants so that they can be a model for what our franchisees should do. And so I really pushed on that, and we made significant investments in our company-owned restaurants. We increased wages for employees. We introduced all kinds of new benefits. We trained leaders on what it meant to care and how they could have a better relationship with their employees. And we saw significant improvements in not just their people metrics, but their business performance. So much so that, 6 months ago, we had franchisees saying, oh, I want to go benchmark with your company-owned restaurants. And that was not the case 3 years prior. They said, don't talk to me about company-owned restaurants. It's not the same challenge. But now they're looking to learn. And it's been a wonderful testament of when you invest in your people, wonderful things can happen. And I think it was a bit of a mindset change from seeing people as a cost, which, when you're running restaurants and you're managing every penny of profitability, I can understand that. But we've seen over time and time again, when you invest in those resources, it's really an investment that yields, a return versus a cost that you have to just manage.
Yeah, I think, when I think about you taking on the global role too, one of the things that you, I think, have done very explicitly is try to bring more of that restaurant focus in.
Yes.
One of the things that in terms of your vision for the function, you've said, I want to, help people do their best work, right? Reach their full potential. And this McDonald's is a place where 1 in 8, 1 in 9 people have worked at McDonald's. It's amazing. So how do you, what's your vision there of pulling that out and making sure that that's a focus for corporate and doesn't just stay in the restaurants?
Yeah, it's a great question. And what you're referring to is we just actually partnered with your team to help us develop our new strategy, which is underpinned by the thought that we power the arches by growing people inspired to do their best work. So that's what my team and function is there for. And we start with Power the Arches because it's all about business impact. I don't really want to talk to anybody about things that don't have a real business impact. And I think you can do a lot of fun and great things in that regard, but I'm trying to also just shift the mindset to make sure that we're focused on things that we can measure and things that actually have, a broader business result. And to do that, you have to have the systems and the data and the analytics, and we're getting sharper and sharper at that every day. We grow people who are inspired to do their best work, and I want people, work is a place where people find a lot of purpose. Work is a place where you make friends, you learn new things, you do something good in the world, and I think we have a unique opportunity just given the size and scale of our business and people at every level from crew room to boardroom who can do something and feel good about themselves, and I want that. Mm-hmm. And I don't think we're there yet. I think our reputation as a restaurant employer is mixed. There are places where people love McDonald's and they see it as a place where they can get their first start. And we open our doors to everyone who can come and be a part of what we call the McFamily. There are other places where I think we still have some gaps that we have to close, where people don't feel proud to work for the brand. And it's why we're doing things like 1 in 8 to talk about the big impact and the role that we play in larger society, not just, in running our business. So we're taking that mindset around the world and learning from other markets that already have, really strong brand reputations in that regard too.
Yeah, no, I love it. And Michelle, when you said yesterday, this concept of brilliance, I connected it. It's full potential, unleashing brilliance. I just really liked that thread. All right, so we're going to open it up in a second, but I do want to ask about future priorities. So as you look forward, what are you most excited about? What do you want to accomplish this year?
Yeah. I'm excited. I mean, there are a few questions, I think,
Yes.
even in that
Fair
question.
enough.
But I'm excited because I think there's so much that we can take in terms of progress that we've made in the U.S. that we can take around the world. Our business is challenged a bit more this year than it has been probably in the last few, and I know many of you are dealing with that. So we're really trying to balance this perform and transform, concept. I see my role in helping the leaders and our employees understand that, manage through that, so this year that's a big part of our focus. In the future, I'm trying to elevate the whole function. And, I said in the beginning, one of the reasons I questioned whether or not I wanted to come to McDonald's was because I wasn't sure if we had strong enough HR. And I found that the people are very talented. We just haven't given them the opportunity to do their best work. And so a part of my job is to make sure we have the systems and tools so that my team can function at a much higher level and have a much greater impact, on the company. So, I'm continuing that theme in terms of elevation, insights, and impact for the company overall.
Awesome. Thank you. Why don't we open it up for the audience to see where the questions are and what's top of mind? I see one over here.
Thank you for this conversation. It's been great and impressive, the scale of what you're working on. I really love the part of the conversation you're talking about, the purpose that you give to the employees through this work and this culture of care. How do y'all think about the relationship of your employees and your franchisees to the community and what the relationship is to how you're investing in the community being a place to host conversations or to connect with that? That seems like such a big part of what y'all are capable of doing, and your employees, y'all are, as you grow these folks, you're growing the community in a lot of ways.
Yeah. I love that question because part of our model, being a franchisor, is that we have people who are connected to local communities who run our restaurants. And I think informally, we do consider ourselves a community center. We have said that, in a lot of different forums because almost naturally people tend to gather, at McDonald's, whether it's the coffee club that comes in the mornings or, different groups that use our restaurants as a place for holding conversation. Well, your question made me think about, our kind of corporate role in facilitating that even more than we have, today. And it's something we've talked about, but we haven't really made great traction on other than the work that happens a bit organically. But I agree, I think we can play an even bigger role, particularly given some of the divisiveness in our country. How could we bring people together and spark more conversation? Not to say we don't want to be in the middle of, political distrust or, some of the challenges that we're facing. But I do think we can be a safe haven for people. But for me, it has to start with our own people.
Yeah.
So I've also been trying to get the company to just focus on doing the right thing for the people who work in our restaurants first, because once we do that, then they'll take care of a lot of the other things that have to be done. Yeah. Thank you for that.
Tiffanie, a question here. Do you have any plans to leverage the culture of care to attract more consumers to McDonald's? Is this something that you see as a growth strategy?
Oh, I love that. Maybe I'll take that back to someone. I think, I guess I'm not satisfied. We've made great progress, but I'm not satisfied. And I don't think we're quite at the point where we can do that. I think we have more work to do. So for example, I mentioned that when we started, our turnover was at 162%. Well, the reality is we separated all of the franchisees' restaurants into quintiles. The top quintile is actually at 74%, but the bottom is at over 200%. there was like a 220 percentage point gap between our best performing restaurants and our lowest performing restaurants. So we still have a fair amount of work to do to get some of those lower performing restaurants either owned by different people, frankly, or we need to improve their performance. So I love the thought. I think we have a little, I would not want to distract the organization with that until we really have stronger consistency across the board.
Tiffanie, thank you for being here, number one. And piggybacking off Trey's comments, with 2 million employees, and I had an old friend and mentor who's now deceased, but who said many of our problems started because we don't teach social science or civics in school today. And I mean, you can almost teach civil discourse and civics to your 2 million employees and make this a better world. And I want to share that we will share with you our tagline, making the world a better place through the workplace. So I think you have an extraordinary opportunity to have an outsized leverage on our society.
Yeah, great. I love that. And, my personal mission is that. I think it's to make businesses and people better, and allow people to do the thing that gives them joy. And I think no matter what your job is, if you're the crew person in our restaurant serving customers or working in the kitchen, or if you're, on our board, all those jobs are really important. And I think part of our role is to help people feel like they are really important.
Mm-hmm. And the amazing thing, too, is the 2 million is like the starting point, because those 2 million employees, if they're reaching their full potential, then they are impacting the customer. So it's like
exactly.
you really, the amount of change you can create through that channel is massive.
Yeah.
Okay, I see. Matthew, then there's a question back here, too.
Okay, Tiffanie, I have to ask. So AI, how has that found its way into helping your employees do their best work?
Yeah. Well, one of the places where we use AI heavily is in our recruitment process. And we use it really to help with scheduling, understanding preferences. So we have an agent that we call Olivia that interacts with all of our candidates. We're expanding it now to do onboarding and kind of answer basic questions. So people can text and say, I forgot the benefits policy, and she can provide information on that. So it makes things easier. They have at their fingertips. That's probably the most prominent way we're using it today. We're also, though, working on a Copilot, and it's not Microsoft Copilot, so our team says we've got to change the name because people are always confused. But we're working on that for our restaurant managers to help them with like basic things such as, when does maintenance need to happen? How do they manage when it's really hectic in the restaurant? We're working on a tool to help with that, to make that job a lot easier, because they're the pressure point for everything that happens in the restaurant. They're doing scheduling, they're taking care of customers, they're training the crew and staff. So we'll be probably launching that within the next year.
Amazing.
Yeah, question back there.
AI was my question, but just want to let you know, listening to you, I just bought a good amount of shares in McDonald's. I'm looking for...
Thank you. And, stock price is down right now because everybody's down. So
I thought you were going to say, like, you ordered McDonald's for all of us or something. So I always like a good Diet Coke and fries, but yes, that's good, too.
And the Diet Coke at McDonald's is different. So
It is.
everybody
it is
wonders,
the best
but
Diet Coke you've
different.
ever had.
It's best. It's the best.
Hi, Tiffanie. Question, I love hearing about your culture of care, and particularly the focus on development. As you think about the development needs, particularly career advancement and growth for your frontline employees, given the realities that they're hourly workers and potentially any time away from the front line takes away from the bottom line, how do you think about development for your frontline employees, particularly if they have long-term career growth aspirations? So I'm just curious how you think about that.
Yeah, it's very important to us. I would say one of the things that I think has been rooted in McDonald's history is a focus on development. We have what we call Hamburger University, which is, recognized, around the world brand for training and development. When we do take those courses out to what we call the field, so into the restaurants, mostly at the shift manager level, and we've actually started to track shift manager level training and the impact of that on restaurant performance. And there is a strong correlation. So we've started to track which restaurants have their shift managers trained. We're working on something now. We've been in partnership with LinkedIn Learning to test some training that we would make available to all employees, including our restaurant employees, so that they can take classes that are just for their own development. We also have Archways to Opportunity, which I don't know if you've heard of that, but it essentially provides every employee the chance to get ongoing education and pursue advanced degrees through our partnership with universities. And if they pick a university that's not in our partnership, they can still get reimbursed for that. So that's an important part of being kind of an employee benefit of being a part of the McDonald's community.
Question, yes.
Over here. Hi. Thank you very much for your presentation. I have a question for you. And that question is about the extent of your ambitions around lowering turnover. So I think about brands like Costco and brands like Four Seasons who operate in spaces where the turnover is like insanely high. And they have really built a differentiated model around low turnover and the value proposition that can deliver. So I wanted to kind of ask you to open up on that.
Yeah.
Like, how ambitious are you, and what do you see as the differentiation that can create?
Yeah, I mean, I think we will always have higher turnover at the restaurant level than in corporate, just because of the nature of the job and the nature of the people we employ. We employ a lot of students, young people that are, getting their first job to then go on to do other things. And we think that's an important part of the role we play in society as well. I want us to get to 100, and people, the franchisees can't quite get their mind around it, in the US anyway. In some other markets around the world, we're already, 60, 40. But with the US on the path to 100, I think 100 will be a good milestone for us to then reevaluate what's realistic. Because I don't know the answer to that question yet, but I want to figure that out. What's a realistic level of manageable turnover? But if we can get to 100, I think that would also be a big rally cry. And we've done that in our company-owned restaurants. So when I first said we can get to 100, people said, oh my gosh, no, we can't. But I think there's power in putting a big goal out there and rallying people around it, because oftentimes they'll surprise you and can accomplish more than they think they can.
Well, okay, maybe we take one more. I know we've gone over. Yes, do you want it? Did I miss someone over here who had their hand up first? Okay. Do we have time for two more, or no? One?
One.
Okay. I don't know whose hand was up first. So, why don't we go over here, because I feel like we've been focused more on this side of the room. So whoever had their hand up here. Yeah.
Last question, no pressure.
No pressure.
No pressure.
Thank you so much. This has been a really insightful discussion. I'm curious to know how you think about what level of change is feasible against a certain timeline. Many of the change initiatives that you described, whether it's systems or programs, things at the franchisee level, all take a certain amount of time, and many against varying timelines, I assume. So I'd love to learn how you think about what level of change is feasible against different timelines, maybe for your own tenure in your current position, and maybe the brand overall as a whole.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think change is only hard for people who aren't prepared. So I'm trying to get the organization to stop saying, change is hard, change is hard, change is hard. People say that in meetings all the time. And I think it's only difficult for the people who aren't ready for the change. So to me, I think about what does it take to get people ready, and whether that's communication, education, system implementation, all those things have different timelines, but what's required to get them ready for the change, and do we have the resources to do it? Often resources are the limitation on how fast you can move on many of these things. So I think about all those things together to determine what can we do. We also make sure that we integrate all of our people or HR initiatives along with the business initiatives. So we can only do so much in a restaurant at any given time. And so we look at what new products are we launching, what promotions are we launching, what training do we need to do, are we implementing new ways of working or a new program. We look at all of those things across different aspects of the business, and we have to prioritize collectively what and when we can do. So we have a pretty rigorous process to do that internally. And I think you have to get the right people with the right knowledge who are close enough. You know, I'm probably not the person who should be prioritizing everything for what happens in a restaurant, but the people who are close enough and have perspective over the things that need to be done can really be an enabler to, you know, prioritize 1, 2, 3 and over time horizons.
I love how you shifted the frame there. It's not change is hard, it's how can we get ready for change, right? Which is a really interesting way to think about it. So thank you, Tiffanie. Clearly there are more questions, so
Thank you.
you know,
I'll be
hopefully
around
you'll
today.
be around
Yep.
later and can answer some of those.
Thank you.